The champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells across the private dining room of Bellissimo, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. My fiancé Marcus stood at the head of the ornate table, his perfectly styled hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. Around him sat his family, his groomsmen, and various members of what he called proper society. I sat at the far end, exactly where his mother had positioned me, nursing a glass of sparkling water and watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To Marcus and his lovely bride-to-be, his father Ronald announced, raising his glass. The word lovely came out slightly strained, as if it pained him to say it. I smiled politely, the same smile I'd perfected over the 8 months since Marcus had proposed. The same smile I wore when his mother Constance criticized my simple taste in jewelry. The same smile that hid everything they didn't know about me.
You know,
Marcus began, his voice taking on that particular tone he used when he'd had just enough alcohol to feel bold.
When I first met Diana, I have to admit, I had my reservations.
My fingers tightened imperceptibly around my glass. Here it comes.
She's from Riverside,
he continued, and several people at the table shifted uncomfortably.
You all know Riverside, the old industrial district. Not exactly the kind of neighborhood where you'd expect to find your future wife.
Polite laughter rippled through the room. I maintained my smile.
Marcus's best man, Trevor, leaned forward with a smirk. Riverside? Seriously? Isn't that where they had those gang shootings last year?
That was 5 years ago, I said quietly. And it was one incident. Still, Constance interjected, dabbing her lips with her napkin. It's certainly not what we're accustomed to. The whole area is rather, well, trashy, if we're being honest. The word hung in the air. Trashy. My neighborhood. My home. My legacy.
Now, Mother,
Marcus said, though his tone lacked any real reproach.
Diana can't help where she grew up.
The important thing is, she's worked hard to better herself. She has that little job at the nonprofit, and she's trying so hard to fit in with our world. My little job. I took another sip of water to hide my expression. If only they knew that little nonprofit was actually a strategic consulting firm that advised Fortune 500 companies, or that I only worked there part-time because I was too busy managing my real career.
I just think it's admirable,
Marcus continued, warming to his subject now, that someone from such humble beginnings could rise up and catch the eye of someone like me. It really shows that in America, anyone can improve their station if they just work hard enough. I felt my phone buzz silently in my clutch. I already knew what it was, my property manager sending me the weekly revenue report. $12 million in rental income last month alone, all from properties in Riverside.
Tell us, Diana,
Ronald said, leaning back in his chair with the air of someone about to enjoy a show.
What does your family do? I don't believe we've ever gotten a straight answer about that.
This was dangerous territory. I'd been carefully evasive about my background, letting them make their assumptions. It had been part of the test, really, to see who Marcus truly was when he thought I had nothing. My grandmother owned some property, I said carefully. She passed it down to my mother, and then to me. Property in Riverside, I assume, Constance said with barely concealed disdain.
What is that? A duplex? A small apartment building?
Something like that, I murmured. What I didn't tell them was that my grandmother, Rosa Martinez, had been a genius. She'd arrived in Riverside in 1952 with nothing but determination and a talent for seeing potential where others saw blight. While white flight emptied the neighborhood and property values plummeted, she bought and bought and bought. By the time the factories closed in the 1980s, she owned 37 buildings. When she died in 2003, she left it all to my mother with explicit instructions: never sell, always reinvest, and wait. Wait for the inevitable cycle of urban renewal. My mother followed those instructions religiously, expanding the portfolio to 72 properties before she passed away 6 years ago, leaving everything to me, her only child. I was 25 years old and suddenly the owner of an entire neighborhood. "The problem with areas like Riverside," Trevor said, gesturing with his wine glass, "is that they bring down the entire city's property values. Urban blight, you know. I read an article about how neighborhoods like that are essentially economic dead zones." I could have told him that Riverside's property values had increased by 47% in the last 3 years. I could have mentioned that the urban blight was being carefully transformed through strategic investment and community development. I could have explained that the economic dead zone generated more revenue than his father's entire investment portfolio. Instead, I said, "That's interesting. I didn't know you were interested in urban development."
"Oh, Trevor's quite the real estate mogul," Marcus said proudly. "He just bought a condo in the Harbor District, paid cash." A $300,000 condo, I thought. I owned the building across the street, bought it for $2.7 million last year. It was worth $4 million now. "You know what Riverside needs?" Marcus said, and I could tell by his tone that he was about to share what he thought was a brilliant insight. "It needs someone to come in and just demolish the whole thing. Start fresh. Build luxury apartments, bring in some decent restaurants. Gentrify it properly."
"Gentrify it," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral.
"Exactly! It's the only way to save these places. You can't preserve poverty. You have to sweep it out and start over."
I thought of Mrs. Chen, who'd run the corner grocery store for 40 years. I'd bought her building and given her a lifetime lease at below market rent. Or the Rodriguez family, whose auto shop had been in Riverside for 3 generations. I'd renovated their property and extended their lease for 20 years. "What about the people who live there?" I asked. Marcus waved his hand dismissively.
"They'll find somewhere else. That's how progress works. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs."
"How philosophical," I said softly. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from Tom. My lead contractor, the renovation on the old textile mill was ahead of schedule. By next month, it would house 50 affordable live workspaces for artists, along with a community arts center on the ground floor. Total investment, $14 million. Expected return, approximately 8% annually, plus immeasurable community value. Not the highest yield investment I could have made, but some things mattered more than maximum profit. "I have to say," Constance began, and I braced myself. "I was concerned when Marcus first told us about you, Diana. A girl from Riverside, working at a nonprofit driving that old Honda. It all seemed rather problematic."
"Mother,"
Marcus said, though again, without any real conviction. "But," she continued, "you've proven yourself to be quite acceptable. You've learned how to dress appropriately, you're taking etiquette classes, and you've been very amenable to our suggestions about the wedding. It shows good character, being willing to learn from your betters." Learn from my betters. The woman was wearing a knockoff Cartier bracelet and thought I couldn't tell. "I appreciate your guidance. I said, because that's what she expected to hear.
The wedding is going to be spectacular,
Marcus said, standing up with his glass raised again.
350 guests, the ceremony at St. Augustine's Cathedral, reception at the Grandview Country Club. Nothing but the best.
All locations I'd suggested, each one booked and paid for by me, though Marcus thought his parents had generously covered the costs. In reality, I'd quietly transferred the money into his mother's account through a series of untraceable transactions. It was easier than arguing about who would pay for what.
And the honeymoon?
Trevor asked.
Where are you taking this lucky lady?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us.
Now back to the story. 2 weeks in Bali,
Marcus announced proudly.
First-class flights, 5-star resort, private villa. I've been saving up for months.
He had saved up exactly $4,000. The honeymoon cost $38,000. I'd paid the difference, letting him think he'd gotten an incredible deal through a once-in-a-lifetime promotion.
That's very generous of you, Marcus, I said. Well, you know me, he said, grinning. Only the best for my bride. I want to show her what life can be like when you leave places like Riverside behind.
There it was again, that casual disdain for the neighborhood that had built everything I had. The neighborhood where my grandmother had scraped and saved and invested, where my mother had continued the legacy, where I had learned that real wealth wasn't about showing off. It was about building something that lasted.
Speaking of Riverside, Ronald said, I heard there's some big development project in the works there. Some mysterious investor buying up property, probably some corporate raider trying to flip the whole area.
I knew he was talking about me, though he didn't know it. The rumors had been circulating for months in real estate circles. Speculation about who was behind the massive property acquisitions in Riverside. Some thought it was a hedge fund. Others suspected a foreign investor. A few had guessed closer to the truth. A private individual with deep pockets and a long-term strategy. No one suspected it was the quiet young woman with the old Honda and the non-profit job.
I heard that too,
Trevor said.
Whoever it is, they're overpaying. Those properties aren't worth half what they're paying. It's going to be a bloodbath when the market corrects.
I'd paid fair market value for every single property, often above market to ensure sellers got a good deal. But I didn't expect Trevor to understand concepts like community investment or long-term value creation. His idea of real estate investment was buying a condo and hoping it appreciated.
The whole thing is probably a money laundering scheme,
Marcus said confidently.
Why else would anyone invest in Riverside?
I could think of several reasons. The strategic location halfway between downtown and the airport. The historic architecture that developers in other cities would kill for. The strong, resilient community that had survived decades of disinvestment. The rising tide of young professionals looking for affordable neighborhoods with character. But most of all, because it was my home. Because my grandmother's dreams were built into those brick buildings. Because my mother's legacy lived in every carefully maintained property, because I'd grown up walking those streets and I'd be damned if I'd let them be destroyed by the kind of thoughtless development Marcus was advocating for.
More wine?
A server asked, appearing at my elbow. No, thank you, I said. Just water. Still don't drink? Constance observed.
How unusual.
Most people have at least a glass of wine at celebrations. I didn't drink because I'd watched my father destroy himself with alcohol. I didn't drink because I needed to stay sharp, to make good decisions, to protect what my family had built. But Constance didn't need to know any of that. I just prefer to keep a clear head, I said simply. Well, you're certainly disciplined, she said, and it didn't sound like a compliment.
Though a little fun now and then wouldn't hurt. You always seem so serious.
Serious.
Yes, I suppose I was serious when I was overseeing a $200 million real estate portfolio, serious when I was balancing community needs with financial sustainability, serious when I was trying to prove that ethical development was possible. But I was also serious when I was sitting at a rehearsal dinner, listening to my fiancé and his family casually mock everything I held dear, and wondering what the hell I was doing here. The truth was, I'd started questioning this engagement months ago. It had begun so promisingly. Marcus was charming, attentive, seemingly different from the entitled trust fund types I'd dated before. He worked at his father's investment firm, but he seemed genuinely interested in making his own way. He asked questions about my work, praised my intelligence, said he admired my independence. But slowly, subtly, things had changed. Or maybe they hadn't changed at all. Maybe I was just finally seeing what had been there all along. The comments about my car being embarrassing. The suggestions that I should dress more appropriately for someone dating him. The way he'd steered me away from his friends when we first started dating, introducing me only after he'd prepared them for my humble background. I'd told myself I was overreacting, that he was just trying to help me navigate his world, that his family's snobbery didn't reflect his own values. But tonight, hearing him refer to Riverside as trashy, watching him laugh with his friends about the neighborhood I loved, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Marcus didn't love me. He loved the idea of me, the charity project, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who he could mold and improve. He loved telling people how he'd saved me from my circumstances. He loved feeling superior, and I'd let him. I'd played the role he wanted because... why? I told myself it was a test, a way to see if he'd love me without the money. But I realize now that was only part of it. The whole truth was more complicated and more painful. I'd wanted to be seen for who I was, not what I had. I'd wanted someone to love Diana the person, not Diana the real estate mogul. I'd wanted to believe that hiding my success would help me find something real. Instead, I'd found someone who loved feeling superior to me, someone who valued me more for my willingness to be diminished than for my actual self. Diana? Marcus was looking at me expectantly. Did you hear me? I'm sorry, what? I was saying we should probably talk about the prenup this week. My lawyer has been asking about it.
Ah, yes, the prenup. The one his family had insisted on. The one designed to protect his family's money from someone like me. Of course, I said. Have him send it over.
Great,
Marcus said, looking relieved.
I knew you'd be reasonable about it. After all, it's just standard practice. Nothing personal.
Nothing personal. Just a legal document designed to ensure that if we divorced, I'd walk away with as little as possible. Because obviously, someone from Riverside couldn't be trusted not to be a gold digger. If only they knew that the prenup they were so carefully crafting would actually protect me. That when the truth came out, and it would come out, I'd be the one shielded from someone trying to take half of what I'd built. I think that's wonderful that you're being so mature about this, Diana, Constance said. Some women get quite emotional about prenuptial agreements, but you understand that families like ours have to be careful. Families like ours. She meant families with money, families with status, families who'd earned their wealth through, what was it Ronald did? Oh yes, he'd inherited his father's investment firm and promptly ran it into the ground before being bought out by a larger company. Now he lived off the buyout money and acted like he'd built an empire. Meanwhile, My grandmother had started with nothing and built an actual empire, one building at a time. I understand completely, I said, and I did. I understood that these people valued appearance over substance. I understood that they measured worth in designer labels and country club memberships. I understood that in their minds, someone from Riverside could never really be one of them, no matter how many etiquette classes she took. The question was, did I even want to be one of them? My phone buzzed a third time. I glanced at it discreetly under the table. A message from Maria, my property manager, and the closest thing I had to a confidant in all of this. Board meeting moved to tomorrow, 2 p.m. Jenkins wants to discuss the development proposal for the waterfront properties. Also, the Martinez family asked if you could stop by the community center this week. They want to thank you for the new playground. I smiled, a real smile this time. The Martinez family, no relation to my grandmother, though they'd become friends. Their kids used the community center I'd renovated last year. The playground had cost $90,000, but watching those kids play was worth every penny.
What's so funny?
Marcus asked, catching my expression. Nothing, I said, tucking my phone away. Just a message from a friend. A friend from work? Constance asked, emphasizing work in a way that made it clear she considered my job barely worthy of the title. Something like that. The dinner continued, course after expensive course. The conversation flowed around me, gossip about people I didn't know, complaints about problems that seemed trivial compared to the real issues facing my community, plans for a wedding that felt increasingly surreal. At one point, Marcus's sister Vanessa leaned across the table toward me. She was the only member of his family who'd been halfway kind to me, though I suspected it was less about genuine warmth and more about teenage rebellion against her parents. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "You seem kind of out of it." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just tired." "This whole thing must be weird for you," she said, gesturing vaguely at the table. "All this fancy stuff? My family can be pretty intense. They're just trying to make sure the wedding is perfect," I said diplomatically. "They're being snobs," Vanessa said bluntly. "Look, I know how they are. They were the same way with my ex-boyfriend because his dad was a teacher instead of a CEO. It's ridiculous." I looked at her with more interest. Maybe there was hope for this family after all. "What happened with your boyfriend?" I asked. "I broke up with him," she admitted. "My parents made it too hard. Constant comments, never thinking he was good enough. Eventually, he got tired of being looked down on, and I got tired of defending him. I regret it now." "That must have been difficult," I said. "The worst part is, they were wrong about him. He was smart and kind and funny, but they couldn't see past where he came from." She paused, then added, "Don't let them do that to you, Diana. Don't let them make you feel like you're not good enough." If only she knew, but I appreciated the sentiment. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "And for what it's worth," Vanessa said, lowering her voice even more, "I think Marcus is being a jerk tonight. All that stuff about Riverside being trashy, that's not okay." I felt a sudden surge of affection for this girl. At least someone at this table had basic decency. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said sincerely. "That means a lot." She shrugged, trying to play it cool in the way that only 18-year-olds can. "Whatever. I just think you should know not everyone here is a total asshole." I had to suppress a laugh. "Noted." The main courses arrived. Some elaborate preparation of beef that probably cost more per plate than most people in Riverside spent on groceries in a week. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, my mind elsewhere. I was thinking about the conversation I'd have to have, the decision I'd have to make. Because sitting here, listening to Marcus and his family, I realized something with crystal clarity. I couldn't do this. I couldn't marry someone who looked down on where I came from. I couldn't build a life with someone who wanted to change me instead of accept me. I couldn't stand at an altar and promise forever to someone who saw me as a charity case instead of an equal partner. The question was, when would I tell him? Part of me wanted to stand up right now, in the middle of this dinner, and announce exactly who I was. To watch their faces as I explained that I owned 127 properties in Riverside, that my little nonprofit job was actually a cover for consulting work that paid me $2 million a year, money I didn't even need but did because I enjoyed the work, that the old Honda I drove was a choice, not a necessity, that I could buy and sell their precious country club membership 10 times over without noticing the dent in my bank account. I wanted to see Constance's expression when she learned that her trashy future daughter-in-law was wealthier than the entire family combined. I wanted to see Ronald's face when he discovered that the mysterious investor in Riverside he'd been gossiping about was sitting at his table. I wanted to see Marcus realize that his charity project was actually his meal ticket, that the prenup he was so carefully crafting was actually protecting me from him. But I didn't, because that kind of revelation wasn't who I was. My grandmother hadn't taught me to flaunt wealth. She'd taught me that real power was quiet, that the strongest foundation was built slowly and carefully, brick by brick, that dignity didn't require an audience. Besides, there was a certain poetic justice in letting this play out a little longer, in letting them continue to underestimate me, in watching them plan a wedding that would never happen, sign a prenup that would never matter, imagine a future that would never exist. I'd tell Marcus the truth eventually, but I'd do it on my terms, in my own time, in a way that honored my family's legacy rather than cheapening it for the sake of a dramatic moment.
Diana?
Marcus was looking at me again.
You're very quiet tonight. Everything okay?
Everything's fine, I said, meeting his eyes steadily. Just thinking about the future.
Our future,
he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand.
It's going to be amazing. I promise you that. I'm going to give you the life you've always dreamed of.
The life I'd always dreamed of? He had no idea what that was. No idea that I'd already built it. No idea that my dreams weren't about country clubs and society weddings. They were about community, about legacy, about using what I'd inherited to make a difference. I'm sure it will be memorable, I said, and that, at least, was true. The dinner finally wound down around 11. There were more toasts, more laughter, more casual cruelty wrapped in jokes and backhanded compliments. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, my smile, my role as the grateful girl from Riverside who was so lucky to be marrying up. As we stood to leave, Constance pulled me aside. "Diana, dear," she said, and I braced myself. "I want you to know that despite your background, we're truly glad Marcus has chosen you. You've shown remarkable adaptability and willingness to learn. That's admirable." "Thank you, Constance," I said neutrally. "I do hope, though, that once you're married, you'll consider leaving that nonprofit job. It's not really suitable for someone in our family. Perhaps you could do volunteer work instead? The Junior League is always looking for members, and it would be much more appropriate." She wanted me to quit my job and join the Junior League. to spend my days planning charity galas instead of actually making a difference in the world. To be a decorative wife who didn't embarrass the family with actual employment. "I'll think about it," I said, which was true. I'd think about it for approximately 2 seconds before dismissing it entirely. "Wonderful," she said, patting my arm. "We're going to make you into a proper lady yet." A proper lady, as if I wasn't already exactly who I wanted to be. Marcus walked me to my car, my old Honda Civic, the one that embarrassed him so much. He'd offered multiple times to buy me something more suitable, but I'd always refused. This car was reliable, paid off, and got excellent gas mileage. Why would I replace it? The real reason, of course, was that I didn't want to show up at my riverside properties in a luxury vehicle. It would create distance between me and the community. The Honda made me approachable, real, someone who understood their struggles because I lived them too, or at least appeared to. "Sorry about some of the comments tonight," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. "You know how my family can be. They're just protective." "I understand," I said. "And honestly, babe, you have to admit, Riverside is pretty rough. It's not like they're wrong. You deserve better than that neighborhood. Once we're married, you'll never have to go back there." Never have to go back there. To the neighborhood where I spent every Wednesday afternoon, walking the streets, checking on properties, talking to tenants. Where I attended community meetings and planning sessions. Where I was developing a comprehensive revitalization plan that would preserve the neighborhood's character while improving opportunities for residents. "Right," I said. "Never have to go back." "Exactly. I'm going to give you a completely new life. You'll see." He kissed me goodnight, and I let him, but I felt nothing except a profound sense of clarity. This wasn't going to work. It never could have worked. I'd known it for a while, but I'd been in denial, telling myself I was just being paranoid or oversensitive. But I wasn't. I was being clear-eyed. And what I saw clearly was that Marcus Carter wasn't the man I should marry. I drove home through the darkened streets, leaving the wealthy suburb where Marcus's parents lived, and heading toward, where else? Riverside. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a renovated building that had once housed a garment factory. I'd kept one unit for myself when I converted the rest to affordable housing. It wasn't much. 900 square feet, exposed brick, industrial windows, but it was mine, and I loved it. I'd never told Marcus where I actually lived. He thought I had a small apartment in a different part of town, somewhere vaguely acceptable. I'd given him an address that didn't exist and made excuses whenever he suggested picking me up at home. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I nodded to Mr. Jefferson, who was sitting on the 2nd floor landing like he did most nights, enjoying the cool air. "Evening, Diana," he said. "How was your fancy dinner?" "Enlightening," I said with a tired smile. He chuckled. "That doesn't sound good." "It wasn't, really." "Well, for what it's worth, you look too good for those fancy folk anyway. Don't let them change you." "I won't," I promised. "Good night, Mr. Jefferson." "Night, Diana." Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and stood at the window, looking out over Riverside. From here, I could see a dozen buildings I owned. The old Riverside Theater that I was converting into a performing arts center. The row of historic brownstones I'd carefully restored. The corner where my grandmother's first building still stood, now home to 6 families and a thriving community bookstore on the ground floor. This was my kingdom. Not country clubs and society weddings, not prenups and propriety. This neighborhood, these buildings, these people, This was what mattered. My phone rang. "Maria." "I figured you'd be home by now," she said. "How was the rehearsal dinner?" "Worse than expected," I admitted. His family spent the entire evening calling Riverside trashy. "While eating at a restaurant 3 blocks from Riverside?" The irony wasn't lost on me. "So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? "I'm going to end it," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "Not tonight, but soon. He deserves better than this charade, and I deserve better than him." "About damn time," Maria said. "I've been waiting for you to come to your senses for months. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened?" "Probably not. Some lessons you have to learn yourself." "When are you going to tell him?" Maria asked. "I'm not sure yet. Soon. Maybe after I sign that prenup they're so excited about." "You're actually going to sign it?" "Why not? It'll protect my assets better than anything my lawyer could draft. Let them think they're protecting their money while they're actually protecting mine." Maria laughed. "Devious. I like it. In the meantime, let's talk about the Jenkins proposal. What's he suggesting for the waterfront properties?" We spent the next hour discussing business, which felt infinitely more real and important than anything that had happened at that dinner. The waterfront development project was my most ambitious yet, converting an abandoned industrial complex into mixed-use space that would include affordable housing, commercial space for local businesses, and a public park. It was the kind of development that would make Marcus's head explode if he knew about it. Affordable housing, public amenities, not maximizing profit on every square foot. In his world, that would be financial insanity. In my world, it was building something that lasted. It was honoring my grandmother's vision. It was proving that development didn't have to mean displacement, that growth could lift everyone up rather than pushing people out. By the time I hung up with Maria, it was past midnight. I should have been exhausted, but I felt strangely energized. Making the decision to end things with Marcus had lifted a weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. Tomorrow, I'd start planning my exit strategy. But tonight, I stood at my window and looked out at my neighborhood, my trashy, rough, not good enough neighborhood, and smiled. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that the girl they'd been condescending to all evening was about to walk away from their fancy wedding and their precious prenup and their whole gilded world. And when she did, she'd leave them with nothing but questions and the dawning realization that they'd completely underestimated who she really was. But that was for later. For now, I had work to do, a neighborhood to build, and a legacy to honor. Riverside wasn't trashy. It was home. And I'd be damned if I'd apologize for that to anyone. Not even the man I'd agreed to marry. Especially not him. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my industrial windows and the sound of the city coming alive below. Saturday in Riverside meant the farmers' market would be setting up in the square I'd renovated last year. Families would be heading to the community center, and Mrs. Chen would be opening her grocery store for the weekend rush. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Marcus and a text. "Good morning, beautiful. Want to grab brunch? We can go over wedding details." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Can't today. Have some things to take care of. Tomorrow?" His response came immediately. "Sure thing. Love you." I didn't reply to that. Instead, I showered, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, and headed downstairs. My first stop was the farmer's market, where I picked up fresh bread from the Nguyen family's bakery stand. Their son Danny ran toward me when he saw me approach. "Miss Diana,
Miss Diana, did you see the new playground? It's so cool.
I'm glad you like it, Danny, I said, smiling genuinely for the first time since last night's dinner. His mother, Lynn, handed me a bag of fresh croissants. On the house, she said quietly. We heard you were the one who made the playground happen. Thank you. You don't have to do that, I protested. We want to. You've done so much for this neighborhood. The building repairs, the fair rents, the community programs. People talk, Diana. We know. I felt my throat tighten. This was why I did what I did. Not for gratitude necessarily, but for community. For the knowledge that I was making a real difference in real people's lives. Thank you, I said, accepting the bag. That means more than you know. I spent the rest of the morning walking my neighborhood, doing what I did every Saturday, checking on properties, talking to residents, taking notes on what needed attention. Mr. Patterson's building needed new gutters. The Martinez family's auto shop had a cracked window that should be replaced. The community garden could use better irrigation. Small things. Important things. The kind of details that mattered when you actually cared about the people who lived in your properties, rather than just seeing them as revenue generators. Around noon, Maria called. I have news, she said. Big news. That development company that's been sniffing around Riverside? Sterling Property Group? The ones who want to buy up the whole neighborhood? That's them. Guess who owns Sterling Property Group? Who? Ronald Carter, Marcus's father. I stopped walking. What? Yeah, I did some digging after what you told me about last night. Sterling is buried under about 6 layers of shell companies, but it all traces back to Ronald. And Diana, they've been making aggressive offers on every property in Riverside that's not yours. They're trying to force a redevelopment by buying up everything around you. My mind raced. How aggressive? 20% above market value. They're trying to create momentum, get enough properties to push everyone else out. Classic gentrification playbook. Buy up enough to make holdouts uncomfortable, then either force them to sell or watch the neighborhood transform around them. When did this start? About 8 months ago, right around when you got engaged. The timing couldn't be coincidence. 8 months ago, Marcus had started asking casual questions about Riverside, about property values, about who owned what, about whether I knew any of the landlords. I'd thought he was just making conversation, trying to show interest in where I'd grown up. But he'd been gathering intelligence for his father. There's more, Maria continued. I found some emails. Marcus has been feeding his father information about Riverside, details about the neighborhood, what properties might be vulnerable, who might be convinced to sell. He's been your father's inside man. I felt sick, not heartbroken. I'd already emotionally disconnected from Marcus, but disgusted. He'd been using me from the beginning. The interest in my background, the questions about my neighborhood, even the relationship itself. It had all been part of a plan to help his father acquire Riverside. Send me everything you found, I said quietly. Already done. Check your email. Diana, what are you going to do? I'm going to finish this, I said, but not the way they expect. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my laptop, reviewing everything Maria had sent. The paper trail was clear once you knew what to look for. Ronald's Sterling Property Group had been systematically targeting Riverside, using Marcus's information to identify which properties to pursue first. They'd been planning to wait until after the wedding to make their move on my properties specifically. I found an email from Ronald to Marcus. Once you're married, you'll have access to her assets. Find out exactly what she owns. If it's substantial, we can leverage that in the acquisition. They'd wanted me for my properties. Properties they didn't even know I had. The irony was almost funny. My phone rang. Marcus.
Hey, babe,
He said cheerfully.
change your mind about brunch tomorrow? I was thinking we could hit that new place downtown, then maybe go look at furniture for the house.
The house. His parents were giving us a house in their neighborhood as a wedding gift. Another thing I'd quietly arranged and paid for, letting them take credit. Actually, Marcus, I think we should talk. Can you come by my place tomorrow? Around 2? There was a pause.
Your place? You never let me come to your place.
I know, but I think it's time. I'll text you the address. Okay. Is everything all right? You sound weird. Everything's fine. I just think we need to have a serious conversation before the wedding.
About the prenup? Because I already told you, it's just standard.
It's not about the prenup. Just come tomorrow, okay? After we hung up, I called my lawyer, my accountant, and 3 members of my board. By midnight, everything was arranged. By morning, it would be in motion. Sunday afternoon arrived cold and clear. I'd spent the morning preparing, setting up my apartment for what was about to happen. At exactly 2 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Marcus stood in the hallway, looking confused and slightly annoyed.
This is Riverside, he said. You told me you lived across town. I know what I told you. Come in.
He entered slowly, taking in my apartment with barely concealed dismay.
This is where you've been living? Diana, this place is... it's not awful, but you should have told me. I could have helped you find something better. Sit down, Marcus. We need to talk.
He sat on my couch, still looking around with that expression of pity mixed with superiority that I'd come to know so well.
Is this what you wanted to talk about? Because honestly, once we're married, you won't have to live in places like this anymore. I've been meaning to tell you.
I'm calling off the wedding, I said quietly. He blinked.
What?
The wedding. I'm calling it off. I can't marry you, Marcus. Is this because of what my family said at dinner? Because they didn't mean anything by it. They meant every word. And so did you. You called my neighborhood trashy, Marcus. You talked about sweeping out the poverty and demolishing everything. You have no idea what you're talking about. Diana, come on. I was just being honest. This area is rough, but that's not your fault. You can't help where you grew up. You're right. I can't help where I grew up, but I can help what I do about it. And I choose to invest in this neighborhood, not destroy it.
Invest?
He laughed.
With what? Look, I know you feel attached to this place, but sentimentality doesn't change reality. Riverside is dying. It needs radical change. Like your father's planning?
His face changed. What are you talking about? Sterling Property Group, your father's company, the one that's been buying up Riverside for the past 8 months. The one you've been helping by feeding him information about the neighborhood. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to calculation.
I don't know what you're...
Don't, I said sharply. I have the emails, Marcus. All of them. I know you've been using our relationship to help your father acquire properties in Riverside. He was quiet for a moment. Then his face hardened.
So what? Yes, my father is investing in this area. That's good news, Diana. Sterling will bring real development, real money. You should be grateful.
Grateful? For gentrification that will push out everyone who lives here?
For progress, for transformation.
This neighborhood is full of poor people living in old buildings. My father's plan will change that. Bring in higher income residents, better businesses, actual property value. And where do the current residents go? He shrugged. They'll find somewhere else. That's how urban development works. You make room for people who can actually afford to maintain an area properly. There it was. The ugly truth laid bare. He genuinely believed that poor people deserved to be displaced. That wealth entitled you to push others out of their homes. Here's what you don't understand, Marcus. You can't buy Riverside. Not the parts that matter. Why not? Who's going to stop us? Some mysterious investor? He laughed bitterly. My father's people have been trying to figure out who owns all these properties. Some ghost landlord who won't sell. But everyone sells eventually. It's just a matter of price. Not everyone, I said quietly. Please, everyone has a price. Whoever owns these buildings will cave eventually. Probably some slumlord who bought cheap and is holding out for maximum profit. Once we acquire enough surrounding properties, they'll sell. They always do. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. Inside were deeds, incorporation documents, property records. I handed it to Marcus. What's this? He asked. Read it. He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first document. I watched as confusion gave way to disbelief, then shock, then something darker. This is... you? His voice was barely a whisper. Me. My mother. My grandmother before her. Rosa Martinez started buying in Riverside in 1952. By the time she died, she owned 37 buildings. My mother expanded it to 72. I've grown it to 127 properties. Commercial, residential, mixed use. I own approximately 40% of all real estate in Riverside. Marcus was staring at the documents like they might bite him. This can't be real. It's all real, verified, legal, and completely mine. The mysterious investor your father has been trying to identify? That's me. The ghost landlord who won't sell? Me. The obstacle to Sterling's grand plan? Me. But you don't have money. You drive a Honda. You work at a nonprofit. You live in this, he gestured around my apartment. I drive a Honda because it's practical and doesn't create distance between me and my tenants. I work at a consulting firm, not a nonprofit, by the way. That was an assumption you made. Because I enjoy the work. And I live here because this is my neighborhood. This is my home. How much? His voice was hoarse. How much are you worth? The property portfolio alone is valued at approximately $218 million. Add in other investments, and I'm worth around $250 million. Give or take. The silence that followed was profound. I watched Marcus process this information, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He was trying to reconcile the Diana he thought he knew with the woman sitting in front of him. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Because I wanted to know who you really were. I wanted to see if you'd love me for me, not for what I have. And I got my answer. That's not fair. You lied to me. I never lied. I just didn't correct your assumptions. You assumed I was poor because I drove an old car and lived simply. You assumed I was beneath you because I came from Riverside. You never asked, Marcus. You never wanted to know the real me. You wanted a project, a charity case, someone you could save and feel superior to. That's not true, isn't it? You spent 8 months pumping me for information to help your father buy up my neighborhood. You called the place I love Trashy. You laughed with your friends about how lucky I was that someone like you would date someone like me.
At every turn, you've shown me exactly who you are."
Marcus stood abruptly, still clutching the folder.
"My father is going to—"
"Your father is going to do nothing," I said calmly. "Because I own the majority of developable land in Riverside, and I will never sell to Sterling Property Group. In fact, I've already filed a cease and desist regarding Sterling's predatory acquisition practices. My lawyers are very good, Marcus. Better than your father's."
"You can't do this!"
"I already have. Additionally, I've purchased the 3 properties Sterling was about to close on. As of this morning, those deals are dead. Your father's grand plan? Over before it really started." Marcus's face went through several shades of red.
"This is insane. You're insane. Do you know how much money my father has invested in this project?"
"I know exactly how much. About $14 million in acquisitions and planning. It's a shame he'll lose most of that, but that's what happens when you build a strategy around pushing vulnerable people out of their homes."
"We were going to help this neighborhood."
"By destroying it? By displacing everyone who lives here? That's not help, Marcus. That's erasure." He was pacing now, agitated. "You've been playing me this whole time. The meek girlfriend act, the etiquette classes, pretending to be grateful for my family's attention. It was all fake." "Not all of it," I said. "I did hope we could build something real. I hoped that maybe you'd see past wealth and status to who I actually am. But you never did. You saw what you wanted to see. My mother is going to be devastated. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Everything's planned." "Then it's good I'm ending it now instead of at the altar. Consider it a favor."
"A favor?"
He laughed wildly.
"You've humiliated us.
When people find out that you're some secret millionaire who's been pretending to be poor, they won't find out from me. I have no intention of making this public. As far as anyone needs to know, we simply weren't compatible. You can tell people whatever you want. I won't contradict you." "And what about my father's plans? You're just going to destroy years of work?" "Your father's plans involve destroying a community. Yes, I'm stopping that. What I do with Riverside is my business, not his." Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at it, and I saw his father's name on the screen. He answered, his eyes never leaving my face.
"Dad. Yeah. We have a problem. A big problem."
He paused, listening.
"It's Diana. You need to sit down for this."
I let him explain to his father, watching his expression shift from angry to defensive as Ronald clearly began yelling on the other end. The conversation lasted several minutes, and I caught phrases like, "She played us," and "We can still find a way." And finally, "I don't know what to tell you, Dad. She owns everything." When Marcus hung up, he looked defeated.
"My father wants to meet with you. He thinks maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement."
"There's nothing to work out. Sterling can keep the properties it already acquired, but there will be no more. And if your father wants to develop what he has, he'll do it according to community standards and with respect for existing residents. Those are my terms." "You're really going to do this? Throw away our relationship over some buildings?" "This was never about buildings, Marcus. It was about respect. About seeing people as more than their bank accounts or their zip codes. You failed that test spectacularly." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something crumble in his expression. Not love. I don't think he'd ever really loved me. But the image he'd had of himself as the generous benefactor, the man who rescued the poor girl from Riverside. That image was shattered, and he was struggling with what remained.
"I should go,"
he said finally.
"Yes, you should. You can keep the ring. Sell it if you want. Consider it compensation for your wounded pride."
He turned toward the door, then stopped.
For what it's worth, Diana, I did care about you. Maybe not the way I should have, but I did.
I know, I said. And that's the saddest part of all of this. You cared about the version of me you created, not the person I actually am. After he left, I stood at my window watching him walk to his BMW parked on the street below. He looked up once, saw me watching, then got in his car and drove away. My phone rang almost immediately. Maria.
Did he take it well?
She asked. About as well as could be expected. He's in shock. His father is furious. Good. They deserve it. What happens now? Now? We move forward with the waterfront development. I've scheduled a community meeting for next Saturday to present the plans. Real plans, not Sterling's displacement scheme. The residents are going to be thrilled. I hope so. This neighborhood deserves investment that doesn't come with a side of eviction.
And Marcus? You okay?
I considered the question. Was I okay? I'd just ended my engagement, exposed a predatory development scheme, and made some powerful enemies. But looking out at Riverside, at the neighborhood my grandmother had built and my mother had sustained, and I was now protecting, I felt more okay than I had in months. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. I feel like I can breathe again.
That's what happens when you stop pretending to be someone you're not.
She was right. For 8 months, I'd contorted myself into a shape Marcus and his family could accept. I'd dressed differently, spoken differently, hidden every part of myself that didn't fit their image of who I should be. And for what? For a relationship built on lies and condescension? No more. The next week was a whirlwind. I met with my lawyers to ensure Sterling's acquisition plans were fully blocked. I worked with my property managers to reach out to residents who'd been pressured by Sterling's agents, assuring them their homes were safe. I finalized plans for the waterfront development, truly affordable housing mixed with local business space and public amenities. I also dealt with the fallout from the broken engagement. Constance called 3 times, each message more indignant than the last, demanding to know what I'd done to upset Marcus. I didn't return her calls. Ronald tried to arrange a meeting, claiming we could find common ground. I declined through my lawyer. Marcus sent one text, late at night on Wednesday.
My family wants to sue you for fraud. I told them it would just make things worse. You're welcome.
I didn't respond. There was nothing to sue for. I'd never lied about my finances. I'd simply never disclosed them. And the prenup he'd been so eager for me to sign would have actually worked in my favor. They had no legal standing, and he knew it. On Saturday, the community center was packed for the town hall meeting. I stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces I'd known for years. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store, the Rodriguez family from the auto shop, young parents from the neighborhood, elderly residents who'd lived in Riverside for decades. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know there have been concerns about outside developers trying to buy up Riverside. I want to address those concerns directly. I explained what Sterling had been attempting, carefully avoiding names but making the situation clear. I explained that the acquisitions had been stopped, that no one would be forced from their homes, that Riverside would develop on its own terms. Then I unveiled the waterfront plan, mixed-income housing designed by architects who understood community needs, commercial space reserved for local businesses at below-market rates, a public park and community center, all built with input from residents. This isn't about maximizing profit, I said. It's about building a neighborhood that works for everyone who lives here, where families can stay, where small businesses can thrive, where community matters more than revenue per square foot." The applause was overwhelming. Afterward, people lined up to thank me, to share their relief, to offer input on the plans. Mr. Jefferson, my neighbor from the second floor, gripped my hand tightly. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly. "Rosa knew what she was doing when she started all this, and you're honoring that legacy the right way." Those words meant more than any compliment from Marcus's family ever could have. Later that evening, I was back in my apartment when Vanessa called, Marcus's teenage sister. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Are you really, super rich?" "Where did you hear that?" "Marcus told our parents, and I overheard. They're freaking out. My mom keeps saying you made fools of them. My dad is ranting about lawsuits. It's kind of amazing, honestly." I couldn't help but smile. "And what do you think?" "I think it's awesome. They were so condescending to you, and the whole time you could have bought and sold them 10 times over. That's hilarious." "I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone, Vanessa. I just wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I have." "I get that. And for what it's worth, I think Marcus is an idiot for losing you. Not because you're rich, but because you're actually a good person. He didn't deserve you." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you tell him? Wouldn't it have been easier to just be honest from the start?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. I think I wanted to believe that someone could love me without the money, that I could be just Diana, not Diana the real estate mogul, but I was wrong to test him like that. It wasn't fair to either of us. "Maybe," Vanessa said thoughtfully, "but he still failed the test pretty badly. All that stuff about Riverside being trashy, that was messed up regardless of whether you're rich or not." She was right. Marcus's contempt for my neighborhood would have been wrong even if I'd been exactly who he thought I was, a struggling woman from a poor area. His attitude revealed his character, and no amount of honesty from me would have changed that. "You're wise for 18, I told her. "Yeah, well, growing up in my family teaches you to see through bullshit pretty quickly. Good luck with everything, Diana. And if you ever need a property manager in about 5 years when I graduate college, look me up." After we hung up, I laughed out loud. Maybe there was hope for the next generation of Carters after all. 3 months later, groundbreaking began on the waterfront development. Marcus had moved to Boston to work for a different investment firm. Whether he'd quit or been fired, I didn't know and didn't care. Ronald Sterling Property Group had quietly pulled out of Riverside entirely, selling their acquired properties at a loss. I still drove my Honda, still lived in my apartment overlooking Riverside, still spent Saturdays walking the neighborhood and Wednesdays meeting with residents and business owners. The only real difference was that I'd stopped hiding, not flaunting my wealth, that had never been my style, but no longer pretending to be less than I was. When people asked what I did, I told them the truth. I managed real estate and invested in community development. Simple, honest, and freeing. One evening, I was at Mrs. Chen's grocery store picking up dinner when a man in line behind me struck up a conversation. "You're Diana Martinez, right?" he asked. "I've seen you around the neighborhood." "That's right," I said cautiously. "I'm David Park. I just moved here last month. Opened a coffee shop on River Street." "Oh, the new place. I've been meaning to stop by." "You should. First cup is on the house for anyone who helped make this neighborhood what it is." He smiled. "I've been hearing stories about you. The mystery landlord who actually cares about her tenants. It's refreshing." We talked for a few more minutes, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. He was smart, funny, and when he asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime, at his shop naturally, I surprised myself by saying yes. As I walked home with my groceries, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The failed engagement that had seemed devastating at the time, but was actually a blessing. The revelation that had freed me from pretending to be someone I wasn't. The reconnection with my roots and my purpose. My grandmother Rosa had bought her first building in Riverside with money she'd saved from years of factory work. She'd seen potential where others saw decay. She'd built an empire one brick at a time, never for show, always for purpose. My mother had continued that work, expanding the portfolio while keeping the mission clear, build community, not just wealth. And now it was my turn. My trashy neighborhood, my home, my legacy, not despite its history, but because of it. Not in spite of its struggles, but in honor of its resilience. Marcus had been wrong about so many things, but he'd been most wrong about this. Riverside didn't need to be swept away and rebuilt. It needed to be honored, invested in, given the resources to flourish on its own terms. That's what my family had always understood. That's what I was committed to continuing. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, Mr. Jefferson was at his usual spot on the second-floor landing.
"Evening, Diana," he said. "How's that new coffee shop?"
"Haven't been yet, but I'm planning to check it out soon." He smiled knowingly.
"That young man who opened it has been asking about you. Seems nice. Respectful."
"Mr. Jefferson, are you trying to play matchmaker?"
"Just saying, there are good people in this neighborhood. People who appreciate what you do here. People who see you, not just your bank account."
"I'll keep that in mind," I said, but I was smiling. Inside my apartment, I stood at my window one more time, looking out at the neighborhood that had shaped me, challenged me, and ultimately defined me. The lights were coming on across Riverside as the sun set, in apartments and shops, in the community center and the new playground, in buildings my grandmother had bought 70 years ago and buildings I'd acquired last month, all of it connected, all of it part of a story that spanned generations, a story of immigrant dreams and hard work, of seeing value where others saw waste, of building something that mattered more than money. Marcus had called Riverside trashy. His family had looked down on my neighborhood and, by extension, on me. But they'd been looking at the wrong things. They'd seen old buildings where I saw history. They'd seen poor residents where I saw community. They'd seen a neighborhood to exploit where I saw a legacy to protect. In the end, they'd learned an expensive lesson. Never underestimate the girl from Riverside, because that girl might just own the whole damn neighborhood, and she wasn't apologizing for it. Not now. Not ever. The end.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.